G'day, AJ Mahar here, and in this video I'm going to talk about, answer the question, what is a vulnerable narcissist? And is a vulnerable narcissist different from a covert narcissist? And then, well, I'll tell you at the end, but then I'm going to be doing my next video coming up, they'll be in a row, is the quiet borderline. And the video after that will be, what's the difference between a quiet borderline and a vulnerable narcissist? So, yeah, they'll be in that order. So in this video, then, because I don't want to make long ones, and that would be probably like at least 20 minutes long if I did it all at once. So, what is a vulnerable narcissist? Well, before I answer that question, I'll answer the other question. Is a vulnerable narcissist the same as a covert narcissist? And the answer is yes. So covert, vulnerable, inverted, narcissist. Basically the same. Could they have some different trait presentations or temperament presentations? Yes, but so anyway, the vulnerable, covert, or inverted narcissist has, here's a quote by Christine Hammond in an article that she wrote on PsychCentral.com. I just wanted to quote this first. Quote, the secret facade of the vulnerable narcissist, the narcissistic qualities of a vulnerable narcissist, which is VN for short, are masked by helplessness, emotionality, and reticent behavior. They are not dissimilar to covert or introverted narcissists, which fly far under the grandiose radar of atypical or classic overt grandiose narcissist. So that's the end of the quote. Now, I have my notes here. Trying to be, never mind. Don't want to digress. If you've been looking online and trying to figure out, the vulnerable, covert, inverted narcissist, but any of those search terms, if you've been looking for any of those things, here's the list here that I've compiled. I did some reading, I did some research, I've quoted a couple people in some of these things, and then some I wrote down all by myself. So the thing is, here are the traits, list of signs that the person that you were with, are confused by, have been traumatized by, abused by, hurt by, and has led you to all this searching online. Then I'm going to talk a little bit more in the third video in this mini series here. Here are the signs of the vulnerable, covert, inverted narcissist. Okay, they are helpless. They have a mindset of helplessness. They exhibit a lot of helplessness. They can be extremely emotional, have a lot of emotionality, as that quote I read said. Reticent behavior, which means silent. They can be silent a lot. Emotionally restrained. Very, very unlike an overt narcissist for sure. They take offense to the slightest emotional reaction that somebody might have, and if they believe that you criticize them, then and in any way imply that they're wrong, and you might not even do that, and they'll think you did, then yeah, even if you just leave them thinking that, they'll feel inferiority, which they can't tolerate, or they'll believe you think they're inferior, which they can't tolerate. Vulnerable narcissists believe they are perfect, and that you fail to see them for all they really are. How wonderful they are, their specialness and their superiority. Superiority that is an overcompensation for deep, vulnerable narcissist insecurities. Well, and as I say that, all narcissists are insecure. And to some degree, I think have vulnerability buried under all of their labyrinth, really, really complicated and thick labyrinth of defense mechanisms. So, but the vulnerable, covert, or inverted narcissist, whichever word you prefer, um, they withdraw from others because no one will ever be good enough to engage with them or in a relationship with them or be good enough. That's their viewpoint, right? And they experience this narcissistic injury, which could be caused by a number of things or not really caused, but they will perceive or feel slighted by just the same and take personally, is the fantasy person they need is non-existent when you don't just meet what they want, what they need, what, they have this fantasy person, and they just will think it's non-existent because is there really somebody that's ever going to be as, special and superior as they are, kind of thing. They can't tolerate even questioning their, in air quotes, self-perception, or beliefs about, again, the self, or, they're not introspective, they're not self-aware, and they have somewhat, in a different way than BPD, they have sort of like not an entirely put together self. Um, so they'll often, these vulnerable, covert, inverted narcissists will often play the victim. Nothing is their fault. It's everybody else's fault. Everybody's treating them badly. How dare you say this? How dare you do that? I can't believe you said this about me, or I can't believe you're doing that, or why didn't you do this, or why didn't you say that? Um, their behavior in general, overall, the vulnerable, covert, inverted narcissist, and I'm not saying, like they're just called all three things, is passive aggressive behavior for sure. It's not grandiose. It's quiet, aloof. They have a need for control of others, the same as, the classic narcissist, overt narcissist. Maybe even more so, I don't know. And control over the environment. Very sneaky in how they go about getting that control. So they exhibit false humility very convincingly. And they will give shallow pseudo apologies. So you'll think you're getting apologized to, but they're still not really real apologies. They present as aloof, bored, condescending, and judgmental, but not with grandiosity or just disinterested, kind of thing. They punish others with silence. They suffer chronic feelings of emptiness. If they feel that emptiness or they're experiencing that emptiness, they don't know how to tolerate it. So that kind of is pretty much what they need to escape all the time. They too want supply, but they're just going about it in a really entirely different way, which is really sneaky, and hard to spot until you've already sort of, been traumatized, abused, hurt. Um, because it's only pain that's going to bring your attention to, like, wait a minute, what is going on here with this vulnerable narcissist or covert narcissist or the inverted narcissist, all of which is the same presentation of narcissism. Um, so they experience a lot of emptiness, like I said, and depression. And they are, yeah, these vulnerable narcissists are, like I said, sneaky, but they have all the same things going on inside to some degree as just the classic, um, overt narcissist, but they're just presenting totally differently. And so in my third video, after I explain what the quiet, the symptoms or traits or what you'll see in a quiet borderline, when I talk about the differences between the two, you'll see some similarities, but they're not the same. And so, I hope that will be helpful too, because I think it's really important to keep stressing these things aren't the same, as people online keep wanting to say they are, just because they feel like that, like based on experience with somebody, and they're not professionals and they don't know how to assess people, and I'm not a diagnostician, but they can't diagnose either. So, the vulnerable narcissist, well, I'll just use that for now. But you know, also again, I'm talking about covert and inverted, the same thing, different words. Has an inner grandiose fantasy that is not displayed outwardly, like the grandiose overt narcissist. And that fantasy equals the escape from, you know, boredom or emptiness inside. They know their public projected self-image is false, pseudo humility often, wanting to, in a pseudo kind of false way, help people. They kind of mirror codependency a lot. And a lot of people mistake this vulnerable narcissist, covert narcissist, for a codependent, as I've said in other videos about the covert narcissist. And they can kind of feign that or mirror that, but don't mix the two up, because codependents are not vulnerable or covert narcissists, and covert or vulnerable narcissists are not codependents. Something else that people are trying to smash together. Why? I don't know. They're extremely, oh yeah, their projected out pseudo image, of course, matters most to them. Extremely self-entitled, and they feel very special, and they're very self-absorbed, and they're all about only coming from their point of view, their thoughts, they're right, you know, that kind of thing. Strong desire to be seen as a rescuer, a human doing, um, and that's how they also mirror codependency from behind the mask of a vulnerable covert narcissist. They use guilt trips on people. They express control needs passively from victim helplessness. Um, they'll project shame onto others as blame. Extremely self-centered. Well, yeah, I said that. They're concerned with only like self everything, right? There is no other really, but they want supply as well. I mean, supply is the goal, to fill up the emptiness. Just a different way of going about it. Usually much more painful and much more traumatic for those on the other side of these people. Um, they really need to be right. Like I said, they have that huge victim mentality. They project their own insecurities out onto you in passive aggressive ways, but also blaming ways. Um, they can tell a really good untrue story of the perfect childhood. They are basically extremely or often very angry, like just that's the condition they live with. They're often really angry, but not overtly. You'll see that in the passive aggressive nature of things, if you're aware of that, if you pick that up. But you won't see extreme like raging like the overt narcissist. They're very bitter, and you see this anger or this bitterness when the mask slips. But for the vulnerable narcissist, or otherwise known as the covert narcissist, otherwise sometimes called the inverted narcissist, when the mask slips, it's very rarely, if ever, in public. Um, they're generally dysfunctional, the helpless victim type, as I said. They lie pathologically also. They don't have the emotional drive of a classic narcissist. So they use they use more passive tactics overall, and that includes the fact that they're very stubborn. Um, so they can drive people crazy, cause people to lose themselves, be really stressed, and or abuse others to the point of causing physical illness due to stress. Um, and their vulnerable passive aggressive victim false humility pseudo image makes it, they're so sneaky, so it's like you're like, people really don't catch on to the vulnerable narcissist, also called the covert narcissist or the inverted narcissist. As I've said in a video about covert narcissism, they don't, often so many people get so hurt and so traumatized before they've caught on. And like I said, you know, now I've seen online the need for doing a video about next up the quiet borderline, and then how is the vulnerable, otherwise called covert, otherwise called inverted narcissist, different from the quiet borderline, because there are some overlaps. And a lot of people online are now, you know, commenting on different sites and all over the place about that they think that, gee, a quiet borderline and a vulnerable or covert narcissist, they got to be pretty much the same. No, they're not. These are two different personality disorders, and they might have similarities, but they're not the same. There's still going to be different manifestations. So the vulnerable or otherwise called covert narcissist is no more the same as the overt. I mean, they are the same as the overt, but not in presentation or the way they exhibit this narcissism. Just as the quiet borderline and the raging acting out, so the quiet acting in borderline and the raging acting out borderline are both people with borderline personality disorder, similar core issues, all same core issues really, different presentations. And that's the same that's true of the covert vulnerable narcissist, covert also known as vulnerable narcissist or inverted narcissist, versus the classic overt narcissist. All the same core woundedness, narcissistic injury, emotional arrested development between the age of 3 and 4, but different presentations, different relational styles, different ways that they're going to come across. And so, but anyway, I'll move on now to the next video, which I hope you'll watch, which will be about the quiet borderline. I hope that was helpful.